We all remember the great wrestlers of any given era. They're usually about as defining of a period in our lives as the great movies are, or even our own memories are. The great wrestlers of an era help to define the direction of the industry and can create great moments of true happiness that we'll hold close with us for a long time after the fact. But what about those wrestlers who were ahead of their time? What about those wrestlers who were perhaps born too early, or whose contributions were monumental but often go overlooked, whether it be their in-ring work, character presentation, or overall style? I'm Adam Pacitti from Cultaholic.com, and these are 10 wrestlers who were born too soon. Join us! Number 10, AJ Lee. Missing out on the true benefits of the current women's evolution by mere years, if not months, AJ Lee was unfortunately seen as an anti-diva in a diva's locker room. Smaller, more petite, and not sporting the same physical, attributes as many of her locker room contemporaries at the time, AJ was like chalk and cheese with the WWE's usual selection of former models turned in-ring performers. And she was actually just a bloody good wrestler with a real eye for grabbing an audience's attention, producing many a memorable moment inside and outside of the women's division during her run in the company. Unfortunately for AJ, she missed out on the current trend of women's wrestling being treated properly and with respect within the WWE, despite being arguably the catalyst for such a change in the first place. She was the woman who started the hashtag Give Divas a Chance and brought their lowly treatment into the eyes of people making the decisions around WWE, and all of this at a time when rumors of the WWE dropping the women's division were running rampant on various news sites around the world. A solid in-ring performer with an alternative look and as good of a promo as there have been in the WWE in recent years, AJ was the face of an almost lost generation of women's wrestler. Someone who would surely have been perfect for the longer amounts of match time, bigger and more important promo segments, and legitimate main events that the women have been given in the years since her departure. Number 9, Jerry Lynn. Ask any wrestling fan from the 90s through to just a few years ago, and they'll tell you that he's one of the very best and most consistent in-ring performers they've ever seen. But unfortunately for the ECW, WCW, and WWE alumni, he never truly saw the bright lights of superstardom, something that would simply not have eluded him had he come along in the current era. Lynn was a fast, technical wrestler with a real eye for storytelling. He was in great shape, had great matches, and wrestled in a style similar to the rough and ready technicians of Chris Benoit, Eddie Guerrero, and Kurt Angle. But what separated him from the rest and made him a wrestler who was simply ahead of his time was his tendency to tell stories with sequences and high-flying spots reminiscent of that which you'd see in Mexican wrestling, a style far more prominent in the current era. Lynn was so good that much of AJ Styles' in-ring style has been molded by his tutelage, with many traits of the great indie legend reminiscent of the multi-time WWE and IWGP World Champions' work to this very day. Number 8, Lita. Lita's lucha libre-inspired ring work and her determination to damn near kill herself with high-risk moves make her the sort of wrestler you're more likely to categorize alongside contemporary stars like Sasha Banks than just about anybody from her own era, Trish Stratus included. She was so ahead of her time in this respect that she often was a part of the show with the guys, delivering head scissor takedowns and her now iconic moonsault as part of many a Team Extreme match. And that was part of her charm. She mixed it up with the men without seeming weak, stupid, or like she was ever being patronized, and this was during one of the company's most outright sexist eras ever. I mean, even the boss's daughter wasn't exempt from being treated like a piece of meat and acting exclusively as a plot point for her male counterparts. Say you took the wrestler, the gimmick, and the look and updated it like Lita did at the 2018 Royal Rumble, she'd be a hugely popular and influential star in the current age, but the genius of it is that she was doing it nearly 20 years ago. Number 7, Christopher Daniels. Like many a name on this list, Christopher Daniels is the sort of wrestler who would have had far more of a well-known career in mainstream popular wrestling had he come around just 10 to 15 years later. Wrestling from the early 90s, Daniels had brief spells in WWF and WCW before ending up in Ring of Honor and TNA for the vast majority of the time since those spells between 1998 and 2001, creating and recreating himself countless times, forging a legacy that will go down as a historically significant career outside of WWE and Japan. Over the years, he's acted as a tutor to the likes of Samoa Joe, Austin Aries, and AJ Styles, and has gained a reputation for being one of those wrestlers who can wrestle anybody to a solid match. His work as a wrestler and a character borrowed from those who came before him, but always felt specifically unique and, in hindsight, way ahead of its time. Ask anybody who was in Ring of Honor at the time of his latest world title run, and they'll tell you that it was well deserved. A crowning achievement for a career that helped to evolve the wrestling game into where it is today, a spoke on the wheel of indie wrestling who should never go underappreciated for his efforts. Number 6, Taz. A human suplex machine. Why does this sound so familiar? Yes, long before Suplex City, there were, of course, countless wrestlers associated with the distinguished style of throw/slam, but none more so than ECW legend and vastly underutilized WWE talent, Taz. Taz was so good at suplexing in the late 90s that he even invented some suplexes of his own, and they're still associated with his name to this very day. Taz was a phenomenal in-ring talent with a true presence as a character, and his literal F the world mantra was one in keeping with the ideas of the time. Yet it was only ever in ECW that he was treated as a top guy, with the sort of legendary status a talent of his type deserved. He'd go out and all but kill guys, offering a legitimacy to his matches that was more in keeping with MMA than wrestling at the time. Sure, once he got to the WWE, he was quickly relegated to the character of short guy with a height complex who was always angry and never quite good enough to overcome his bigger opponents, but that's not his fault. Taz was offering the sorts of technical and psychological masterclasses in ECW that the WWE's current brand of history wouldn't like to highlight, and he was influencing countless stars that would come after him, not least Kurt Angle and Brock Lesnar, two wrestlers who brought a lot of amateur experience to the ring with them, but borrowed from Taz's extraordinary sense of legitimacy. Number 5, Dynamite Kid. The UK's own Dynamite Kid was as fast and athletic as they come. A wrestler short in stature, but built like the proverbial brick you-know-what house, and always an entertainer between the ropes. Kid was so fantastic in his rise up the wrestling ranks around the world that it's said that he became a huge influence on many of the stars of the 90s and early 2000s due to his no-nonsense, high-impact, quick-footed offense that made a man of his size seem just as dangerous as his much bigger adversaries. He was the sort of wrestler who, as part of the British Bulldogs, could be transposed onto the current stage without a problem, but as an individual wrestler he was probably around a decade to 15 years ahead of his time, wrestling matches and presenting himself more like the athletes of the mid to late 90s and early 2000s than anyone from his own era, defining a career because of it. Number 4, Nigel McGuinness. If current NXT and 205 Live commentator Nigel McGuinness had come around just 5 to 10 years later, we'd be talking about him as one of the major stars of the current era, a guaranteed NXT champion, and likely the face of his own Undisputed Era-esque stable of indie legends. McGuinness was simply a phenomenal wrestler in the mid to late 2000s, earning multiple Ring of Honor championships, including the world title, and wrestling Match of the Year candidates with the likes of Daniel Bryan, Cesaro, and Austin Aries. In the ring, he was as good as anybody, using the now familiar but at the time quite evolved and less popular style of strong style-inspired offense, and he combined that with a brutal-looking bump technique that only added to the drama every time he was in the ring. He was simply the total package. Unfortunately, McGuinness's career was cut short, and he was never the beneficiary of the current WWE employment policy of signing the very best of the indie circuit, making him a legendary wrestler, yes, but one with a huge what could have been forever attached to his legacy. Number 3, Raven. Okay, I know what you're thinking. A grunge fan turned satanic cultist in the modern era? What are you going on about, Adam? But take a moment to look underneath the exterior presentation of Raven's character, and you'll see a performer with extraordinary depth, undeserving of the era's insistence upon instant gratification and violence. In ECW, he committed acts previously unseen in wrestling, and in WCW created a cult-like group borrowed by stars as popular as CM Punk and The Undertaker with the Straight Edge Society and Ministry of Darkness in the years since. He was a revolutionary who could grab the attention of literally anybody, wrestling fan or not, when he got on the mic and was telling stories on a whole different playing field to most of his contemporaries at the time, making him not only certifiably ahead of his time, but also vastly underappreciated for his influence and legacy. Number 2, Brian Pillman. He was known as the loose cannon Brian Pillman for a reason. In the mid-90s, Brian Pillman signed for the WWF after a stint in WCW as one half of a good-looking duo named the Hollywood Blondes. Under Vince McMahon's tutelage, he lent into his personal issues to create a character so off-kilter and downright scarily psychotic that he put Dean Ambrose to shame. He was so convincing in his portrayal of this character that the WWE nearly got Raw pulled from TV when people phoned local authorities to report that he'd pulled a gun on Steve Austin, with the documentarian-like feed of the in-house camera crew turning to black on the sound of gunshots. This was happening at a time we're told was before the Attitude Era. Let that sink in for a moment. Pillman was an adult-rated character in a product still largely aimed at children, and his portrayal was so great he was up there with the very best of TV's characters at one time. It was like he was an Attitude Era star waiting to happen, a guy with so many iconic and memorable Attitude Era moments in him that we didn't deserve him. Unfortunately, he'd never get to reap the benefits of working during the era it seemed he was born to perform in, due to his untimely and unfortunate death at the age of 35 in early 1997, but his legacy was one of a trendsetter turned revolutionary with a gun in his back pocket and a couple of crazy eyes that made him a character even The Undertaker wouldn't want to mess with. Number 1. Gorgeous George. Almost everything we see as far as the presentation of professional wrestling goes in the modern age was invented by or popularized by the legendary all-time great that is Gorgeous George. It was as if wrestling was simply wrestling until he came along, and then wham, the whole entertainment aspect was put into top gear and showmanship was the order of the day. Taking advantage of the advent of television, Gorgeous George created a character like no other, popularizing a love-to-hate gimmick through the revolutionary for the time methods of entering the arena to music, something never done before, at least on such a mainstream level. He was a walking gimmick machine, with his hair in tight blonde curls and his demeanor almost royal in presentation. He even had the ring sprayed for cleanliness before he entered it. He was so ahead of his time that he even created new character archetypes for the wrestling industry, managers and valets. You know that heel gimmick you see with, well, just about everybody at some stage of their career? The young heel and the experienced manager, or the cocky heel and his valet? That's straight from the book of Gorgeous George. He was wrestling's first crossover superstar not because of his incredible in-ring acumen, but because of his presentation and originality, and has gone down in the record books as one of the all-time greats because of it. Even Muhammad Ali once cited him as a huge influence and an all-time great entertainer, and I'm not going to argue with that. So that's our list. Let us know what you think in the comments below, and you can follow me on Twitter here. If you enjoy what we do here at Cultaholic, you can pledge to our Patreon. That's patreon.com/Cultaholic. And most importantly, don't forget to hit subscribe and join us.